On October 28, 1990, 13 American reconnaissance soldiers crossed into a forgotten concrete facility codenamed A-42, a bunker hidden near the German-Belgian border. The Cold War was technically over, the Berlin Wall had fallen, but intelligence whispers suggested this site had once been used for illegal medical experimentation on children, and rumors swirled that activity still continued under cover of retreating paramilitary forces. The 13 men and women who entered were meant to secure it. Only one came out. That was Ruth Hawthorne, a nurse-turned-covert operative who had been drafted into special missions after surviving horrors on the edges of NATO's Balkan operations. She emerged after 6 hours, bloodied from head to toe, silent as grave dirt, and refusing to say what happened. 3 days later, Ruth herself vanished. The Army declared her deceased, the file stamped "Killed in Action." The site was sealed with concrete slabs, and every page relating to A-42 went into classified archives with a blackout order for 15 years. 15 years later, in 2005, an elderly schoolteacher named Dorothy Mills died peacefully in Indianapolis. Her family remembered her as a devout woman who baked pies, volunteered at church, and never missed a Sunday Mass. While helping to sort her belongings, her granddaughter broke through a patched section of wall in the basement and found a narrow, hidden room. Inside stood a cabinet and a trunk heavy with secrets. There were 43 black and white photographs showing dead men in uniforms, all taken between 1991 and 2004. There were surveillance logs written in harsh, blocky English, peppered with fragments of German. And there was a leather journal with a first page bearing a confession. My name was Ruth Hawthorne. I was the ghost. I did not die in that bunker. I discovered something that made me disappear. What followed in the journal and in the story pieced from official fragments revealed why Ruth chose to erase her name, why she stalked men across 3 continents for over a decade, and why she died under another name. The story really began in September of 1990, in the tumult of ethnic conflict breaking out along the borderlands of Kosovo. NATO had only just stepped into observer and medical support roles, leaving small medical stations scattered and poorly defensible. Field Med Station 7, outside Mitrovica, was a 3-room clinic packed with 23 wounded Americans evacuated from skirmishes. Ruth Hawthorne had worked 36 hours continuously, stitching burst arterial wounds, changing dressings, soothing boys younger than her own brother, running on nothing but bitter coffee and duty. Medicine in those months often meant keeping men alive for another hour, even though both doctor and nurse knew they would not last the night. At dawn, as she adjusted a private's IV drip, she heard the rumble of engines outside. They were heavy Army trucks, too fast, too aggressive. Her supervising surgeon muttered, "At last, resupply." But Ruth knew the cadence of friendly engines. Instinct told her something darker was arriving. Moments later, the double doors banged open. 12 Serbian paramilitary fighters entered without hesitation, rifles hanging low, postures frighteningly casual as though they owned the place. Their commander was strikingly young, no older than 25, with a scar through his eyebrow and blue eyes that looked at people as though they were already corpses. He demanded their stocks of morphine, sulfa, bandages, his English broken but clear. The American surgeon opposed him with trembling outrage, citing the Red Cross neutrality of the clinic. The Serbian looked at his clipboard, stepped toward the nearest bed where a soldier barely conscious from shrapnel surgery lay, and shot him clean in the head. The crack of that pistol shattered sanity. Patients screamed, thrashed, tried to crawl away on broken limbs. Those who could not move stared in mute horror as one by one the commander methodically executed the names on his list. When Dr. Harrison lunged to protect them, he was held by 2 men and his throat open neatly with a knife. His eyes fixed on Ruth, silently mouthing, "Hide!" Her body obeyed before she even decided, stumbling backwards into a supply closet where she held the door half closed and gagged her own sobs with shaking hands. Through the thin crack, she saw everything. 23 young Americans who had survived battles only to be lined up and dispatched in less than 15 minutes. Private Morrison tried to reach the rifle hidden under his cot, but was gunned twice before he could close his fingers. He had been 19, from Iowa, often showing Ruth love letters from a girl named Betty back home. When the killers left with their looted crates of medicine, the silence was worse than the shooting. Ruth forced herself to wait another 20 minutes, then emerged into a ward of stillness so heavy that the sound of dripping blood became unbearable. She checked every bed, even though she already knew they were all gone. Something inside her shifted when she pried Morrison's rifle from beneath his body. It still held his body's warmth. She had once promised her father to never use a weapon, that she was born to save lives, not take them. But as she held the rifle across her chest, she knew she would never again be only a nurse. She tracked the Serbian squad across ruined villages by following the muddy tire impressions in the wet soil, just as her father once had taught her to follow deer trails in the Pennsylvania woods. When she caught up with them, they were sharing stolen medical supplies in an abandoned settlement. Through Morrison's carefully oiled scope, she watched the commander smoke a cigarette, the whistler hum the same tune he had whistled while killing, the knife man calmly polishing the blade that had slit Harrison's throat. She no longer felt the weight of morality. Through the cool circle of the scope, her breathing slowed. She placed the shot not for speed, but for pain, beneath the vest in the stomach, a place where he would know he was dying. She did not flinch as she squeezed the trigger. The commander folded as though dragged by invisible hands. She dropped 2 more men before the others found cover, and then she was moving, reloading, hunting. For 3 days she picked off the remainder. 2 threw long-range shots across 300 yards, one with the very knife that had killed Harrison, others ambushed in barns and fields. She left Morrison's playing cards on each body, 2 of hearts, 3 of clubs, 4 of diamonds, 5 of spades, on and on. Survivors whispered of a phantom stalking them. By September 20th, 11 of the 12 were dead. The 12th would be killed incidentally by stray artillery, but Ruth did not know this. She already accepted that she would spend every ounce of strength hunting them until she finished. Rumors grew. Serbian radio chatter spoke of Du, the ghost, an unseen American operative leaving cards on corpses. Panic hit disproportionate to the tactical value. Whole squads altered routes to avoid an unseen predator. By the time NATO intelligence finally intercepted her, she had scored nearly 50 confirmed kills in 2 weeks, almost all precision headshots and ambushes. She denied feeling satisfaction, but deep inside she recognized the terrifying perfection of her new role. One October evening, her handler, known only as Control, placed a map before her. There was chatter about a convoy marked with medical insignia, ferrying children toward a hidden installation. They wanted her to trail it, harass their guard units, sow panic, and determine where they went. This was her unofficial contract: cooperate or be court-martialed as a deserter. Ruth didn't answer with words. She merely loaded Morrison's rifle and nodded once. For 2 nights she stalked the convoy. The trucks carried children aged 8 to 14, examined with tape measures and needles like livestock. Under torchlight, a bespectacled doctor took constant notes. Ruth recorded their pattern, then struck. By dawn, 20 children had been freed from cages. 10 guards lay cold around scattered trucks. Only the medical staff remained. And under interrogation, Ruth learned the existence of Bunker A42, hidden 40 kilometers away, where a dozen children already underwent Phase 3. She was warned she was too late. The procedures had begun. On a warm May afternoon in 2001, 9-year-old Mia Thompson stepped off the school bus on Maple Avenue, just a short walk from home. She carried a doll under one arm, and her beloved pink backpack bounced softly against her small frame. The street was familiar, one she had walked hundreds of times without incident. That day, though, just 50 yards before safety, Mia disappeared forever. Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor tending the bright rows of flowers in her garden, noticed the girl passing by. Mia skipped lightly along the pavement, humming a tune known only to herself. She waved, and Henderson raised her hand in return. The memory of that fleeting gesture, so ordinary in the moment, yet so final, would replay endlessly in Henderson's mind. Just minutes later, the world had already shifted into something unrecognizable. At the Garcia household next door, Maria Garcia was preparing the snack she set aside every afternoon for Mia: apple juice in a glass cup and a plate of peanut butter crackers. She waited by the kitchen window, scanning the street for the small figure she was accustomed to seeing just after school. When nearly 20 minutes had gone by with no sign of Mia, Maria assumed Linda Thompson, Mia's mother, might have left work early and fetched her daughter directly. But repeated calls to the Thompson home went unanswered. The unease that began as a ripple soon turned into an undertow of dread. Linda, working a shift at the diner, dropped everything after Maria's frantic call. She rushed home only to step into a silent house, her daughter's room perfectly preserved from that morning. Stuffed animals sat neatly arranged on the pillows. The bed was not made the way Mia had left it. Her outfit for the next day was carefully laid across a chair, a small ritual Mia carried out for reassurance and routine. The normalcy of that space now seemed like a quiet scream. By the end of the day, the quiet of Millfield was shredded by flashing lights and the sound of officers knocking from door to door. Police lined the street, combing through backyards, checking basements and garages, pressing neighbors for anything they might have seen. When night fell, the truth chilled the town. Mia Thompson was gone. Detective Sarah Collins, a veteran of missing persons investigations, felt a particular weight settle on her shoulders when she took charge. In her dozen years on the force, she had seen her share of tragedies, but the abduction of a child in broad daylight from such a close, watchful community struck her as profoundly unusual. Something about this case felt wrong from the very beginning. She understood the stakes of those crucial first 2 days, when hope still burned brightly but could be extinguished with disheartening speed. Search parties began at once. Volunteers streamed into town, equipped with flashlights, radios, and wearied determination. They spread into the woods surrounding Millfield, calling Mia's name through trees that stubbornly kept their silence. Volunteers trudged through creeks until their ankles bled from hidden stones. Dogs directed toward scents circled around, then came up empty. Helicopters surveyed patchworks of farmland and forest, their mechanical eyes sweeping where human vision failed. Linda stood vigil outside her home as the search unfolded, clutching one of Mia's sweaters as though it were an extension of her child. She whispered again and again, "She's out there. She's calling me. I just can't hear her." Her husband, Jake, Mia's stepfather, coordinated groups of volunteers in near military fashion, his voice steady even as his hands betrayed tremors. The community's collective hope wore thinner by the day. 10 miles of searching became 15, then more, until the landscape they all thought they knew felt like alien territory. After 8 days, 2 teenage boys approached police with something they suddenly realized might have mattered. Marcus and Tyler recalled seeing a small girl climbing into a dark red car around the time Mia vanished. She didn't appear to resist or fight, they reported. It looked as though she knew the driver. The tip turned speculation into a multi-state search. Law enforcement broadcast alerts to surrounding regions, pulled over vehicles matching the description, and cataloged every possible lead. Yet the more they chased the image of the red car, the less substance it seemed to hold. Days turned into weeks, the months passed with no answers. In November, half a year later, the case took a sudden and shocking turn. David Morrison, a 28-year-old man with developmental challenges who lived with his elderly mother, was arrested after an incident at a local playground. Under pressure and guilt, a confession tumbled out clumsily to his mother. He was responsible for Mia's disappearance. His account was fragmented, contradictory, and mired in confusion. He said he had only tried to apologize to Mia for an earlier encounter, that she became frightened, that he panicked, and that things spun out of control. Terrified by his admission, his mother alerted authorities at once. Police quickly took David into custody. Though his explanation was inconsistent, it at least gave a name and a supposed perpetrator to a town desperate for conclusions. He was eventually convicted of Mia's murder and sentenced to life. Linda Thompson wept in court, grappling with the heavy mix of devastation and relief. Relief that she at last knew who had taken her little girl. Devastation that it solved nothing in the emotional void where Mia should have been growing up. But Detective Collins resisted the sense of closure that others embraced. In her eyes, too many details did not fit David's recollections. The places he described, the timing, even the way he explained Mia's final moments had gaps she could not reconcile. Though the file on her desk said closed, something within her refused to let go. The years rolled on like an unwelcome tide. Linda and Jake's marriage fractured beneath the crushing silence of grief, each of them haunted by what they had lost. Neighbors moved away, unable to withstand the daily reminder. The bus route changed, no longer stopping where Mia was last seen. The rhythms of town life adjusted, but nothing felt secure again. Meanwhile, David remained in prison, proclaiming innocence even after his original confession. His lawyers argued that his disabilities had made him vulnerable to misleading questions, that he had been desperate for relief from hours of interrogation. Despite appeals, his fate seemed sealed. Then, in October 2016, 15 years after the disappearance, the ground of Millfield shifted once more. A mushroom hunter in Woodland State Park discovered something unusual beneath the soil. Bits of fabric, a faded backpack, and eventually the fragile remains of a child. Ranger Patterson contacted Chief Collins, who was only weeks from retirement. She raced to the site, her heart already heavy with the suspicion of what she was about to see. There, in the dirt of the Pennsylvania woods, less than 15 miles from Mia's neighborhood, lay the belongings she had once carried into the light of that May afternoon. The pink backpack was faded, the doll Sarah partially buried but unmistakable. DNA confirmed what her bones already told the world. After 15 years, Mia had been found. But this was not salvation. Her remains contradicted everything about David Morrison's supposed confession. She had been buried quickly after her disappearance, not much later as David had claimed. Evidence pointed to the fact that she had not even died in that spot, suggesting she had been carried there from somewhere else. Collins's old unease now congealed into hard suspicion. David Morrison had not killed Mia Thompson. Forensic advances unavailable in 2001 allowed researchers to examine the grave site with new precision. The DNA recovered there matched not David, but Marcus Chun, the teenager who had once been considered merely a helpful witness. Marcus, who had described a mysterious red car. Marcus, who had since died in a car accident. The revelation cast his old account in a chilling new light. Investigators pressed his younger brother, Tyler, now an adult. With tears, he admitted deep unease about Marcus's behavior, describing an older sibling who made him feel unsafe, someone whose fixation on children had long unsettled him. Could Marcus have lured Mia that day? Could the story of the red car have been deliberate invention to protect himself? The evidence suggested as much. But Marcus could no longer face questions. The grave had closed its lips years before. Complicating matters, the grave also revealed a second DNA profile, belonging to someone other than Marcus. Investigators scoured databases, searching desperately for a match. What came back was the unexpected name of Kyle Morrison, David's older brother. Kyle had briefly worked at the same summer camp where Marcus had once been employed. A connection overlooked at the time now took on sinister relevance. Brought in for questioning, Kyle eventually unraveled. He described a strange and deeply disturbing plan orchestrated by Marcus, a lesson meant to stage an abduction so Mia would learn about danger and trust. Kyle claimed he believed the girl would be returned safely after an hour. But when Mia began to cry, demanding her mother, Marcus lost his temper. In a fit of rage, he silenced her forever. Terrified, Kyle confessed he helped bury the body rather than face responsibility. He lived with this secret for 15 years, crippled with guilt, yet convinced by Marcus that keeping quiet spared their family's humiliation and spared David from worse punishment. For a brief moment, it appeared that the tragic knot had at last been untangled. Yet, like every chapter of this bitter saga, the resolution was soon thrown into disarray. Kyle retracted the confession weeks later, claiming exhaustion, coercion, and manipulative questioning techniques. His lawyer shredded the integrity of the DNA findings, seizing upon issues in the chain of custody. What had looked like closure again crumbled into stalemate. By 2020, after nearly 2 decades of circling suspicions, the district attorney admitted the case could not be substantiated in court. There was not enough evidence to convict anyone. Kyle Morrison walked free. David, too, had already been released after his own wrongful imprisonment. 2 men had separately confessed, 2 men had separately been dismissed, and still Mia's murder was unresolved. For her mother, the endless parade of answers that dissolved into nothingness was its own torment. Every courtroom, every press conference, every whispered rumor only teased her with the illusion of finality. She filed a civil case years later against Kyle, seeking recognition if not conviction. It was thrown out for lack of definitive evidence. The law had nothing left to offer her. Mia Thompson should be 32 years old today. Instead, she is forever a 9-year-old frozen in memory, a child with blonde hair skipping down Maple Avenue, a doll clutched tightly, humming a carefree tune. The truth of what transpired in those last 50 yards remains embedded in a web of contradictory accounts, vanishing evidence, and mistakes that can never be undone. For Linda, the only option left is remembrance. She sits sometimes in Mia's preserved bedroom, flipping through notebooks with childish scribbles, whispering soft vowels to the air. "I'm still looking, baby." Friends and strangers alike leave flowers on her memorial at the state park where she was found. Some cases never die. They linger as long as people are willing to remember the lost. Detective Collins, long retired, still calls it the failure that shaped her career. "I brought her home," she once told Linda, "but not in the way you deserved." They both know there is no neat ending. What happened to Mia was not a puzzle with a clean solution, but a tragedy too entangled with human weakness, false confessions, and flawed justice to be unraveled completely. Perhaps one day, improvements in forensic science will shed brighter light, revealing what remains hidden in fragments of evidence stored away in dusty boxes. Perhaps someone will finally speak with clarity about what they know. Until that moment, Mia's story endures in a liminal state, unfinished, unresolved, yet unforgettable. In the end, the tragedy of Mia Thompson is not only the loss of a child, but a lesson about the limits of certainty, the ease with which desperation creates answers, and the heavy price of mistakes. Justice has been delayed, denied, twisted, and returned only to disappear. Yet it has not been abandoned. For every whisper of her name, for every flower at the memorial, for every mother's prayer, her story lives on. And somewhere, among fading memories or overlooked evidence, the truth still waits.